So hey, my name is Rüdiger, and I'm going to talk to you today about, well, what I wrote down here as the unexpected, somewhat, mind-bender of developing entertainment games based on political history with the help of government or, let's say, broadly, public funding. And we'll do that by looking at the game that my company developed called Berlin Maniacs, or we developed a prototype. And so I'm one of the founders of Achtung Autobahn Studios. We're based in Germany. And we founded to do social realist games. And a little bit about me, I worked in the game industry now for around 6 years, which feels short and long at the same time for some reason. But before that, I studied history and literature and cultural anthropology, and I tried to do my PhD in history till I was like, well, fuck that, but I'm still around somehow. You need to eat, and eventually you're just like, all right, I need to try something else for this. So, to quickly give you an overview, I'll quickly tell you what Berlin Maniacs is, because I guess you haven't heard about it. Then what the original premise was, then how we applied for government funding and how that changed what the premise is, and then how we pitched to publishers eventually and how that changed stuff again. And then I'm gonna run through a few learnings that we had from that, because I think that's kind of fascinating. All right, so first, what's Maniacs? So right now we call it, as you can see it here, 1960s student protest action adventure. And you play the person that's in the picture here called Tina, who is a runaway, who joins one of her friends on the streets of West Berlin to simply said to fight for a more democratic German state, but obviously at the time a West German state, because we're in West Germany and West Berlin. And so the game is fictionalized. I mean, we have no actual historical figures in it. We just will use the stories of the time to frame the game and then talk about it. And the game itself focused on demonstrations, or specifically one, and the subsequent clashes between students and other protesters and the police. And in 2021, we got funding to produce a prototype of the game, which is looking now like this. Let's see if this works. Well, play, I guess. There we go. So, to quickly, it's just a short video. You see it's like a top-down view. It's 3D. You can run around, you can collect bottles, you can throw bottles. We intended that you distract people, so you can go somewhere where you're supposed to go. You have a camera where you can take photos. This is kind of tied into the quest system. And obviously there's protest, and the police is going to come after you and try to beat the shit out of you, as it was when West Berlin in the 1960s. Sometimes. So this is just to give you a rough idea. But this wasn't how we started out. We had a way better idea. We started out with, let's make a game about West German left-wing terrorism organizations in the 1970s. The most infamous of those, obviously, I'm not sure who knows this, was the so-called Red Army faction. I'm mentioning this because I might call it the RAF, and I don't mean the Royal Air Force. Unfortunately, they have the same abbreviation. So, and the core idea of what we had in mind was to kind of explore the process of radicalization and track it into its systemic roots. So we were just interested in the process. And you can see here, at first we had even a pregnant character. Don't ask me how we thought this all fits together. That then already changed into a single mother of 2. And you can see here on the right, that was the earliest notes I still could find in our systems. We wanted to explore how a single mother has to handle her kids' works, and then is entangled into this political system, and through that, all these stress onto her as a person within society, she kind of radicalizes her. So that was the original idea. But you can already see here a few features that also kind of stayed till Berlin Maniacs today, which is top-down camera view. We already had photography as a core mechanic, and the late 1960s as a time frame were already present. Well, then, when we came up with a base idea, we needed some funding to actually do this, because it was quite a complex thing. It was not something that we could just achieve at the site, so we needed a bigger team. And then we applied for government funding. And I wanted to look at funding applications. They're in German, but I'm going to talk about what's standing there. We had 2 specific sections that kind of tell you how we felt that we had to change things. And these both sections are called Klarstellung or clarifications. And basically, this was the first one for our concept funding. What I'm saying here is that we pointing out, or feeling the need to point out, that one of our main characters has a lot of similarities to one of the core members of the Red Army faction, but this is just superficial. Don't get distracted by this. So we're talking to the funding body here, right? And the next one is that we're obviously we're clarifying that our game is intended to thematicize the memory of Nazi Germany and how that led into that work around that in the 60s led to kind of like certain radicalizations among students. So we're kind of trying to wiggle ourselves into this whole memory culture of Nazi Germany, which is a very accepted thing to talk about, as Kasi already pointed out. And then we are also stated that we really want to have a nuanced view on history, which will definitely not glorify violence or underground heroes. You would see that really work well because we can throw bottles at the police. Then, just to jump to the next one, this was then like a couple of months later when we applied for prototype funding. And something changed already. So at first, same section, class drill and clarification. Now we talk about, it's not about the RAF anymore. Now we talk about, it's a student protest in the 1960s. So some things have changed. And now the new clarifications there. We want to say that, we definitely not want to say that this accusation a lot of students had at the time, that like the German state is an oppressive one. That's definitely bollocks, and we're not saying that, which obviously we're saying because it's like, when you say you're not saying it, you're saying it. And we're really trying to distance ourselves from this notion. And this is just, I'm reading this backwards again, and it's just it's so odd to see it. And so these two sections change, so superficial changes, right? So we changed from the terrorism to the student movement, and we are increasingly trying to make sure to just tell the German state we're not hating them. And the fun part is nobody ever told us to do this. So why did we do this? And this, I will come back to this in the end. But I just so you have an idea, this changed when we applied for government funding. And in the end, specifically the change you can see here is that we kind of felt, let's talk about this now. We felt that we needed to kind of justify our interest in radicalization, or try to make really, really sure that people don't think that we're saying, hey, radicalization is not something bad. Not that it's good, that we're not even implying that it's not bad, because this is kind of this a general thing, and especially in liberal democracies, that the stance here is radicalization is bad. We wanted to make sure that we're not saying that it is not bad, not even good. That you can see that us stumbling around this thing. What we actually wanted to just say, we wanted to explore how radicalization happens. But so then, while we developed all of this, we already knew that the game was quite extensive, so we started to pitching to publishers pretty early on. And that worked pretty well at first. And then these are two standard responses we got. This is kind of the wall we hit after a while. So if you feel free to read it, but I'm just going to paraphrase. So a classic thing was we love your game, and if you ever pitched to publishers ever, they always say that, and then but we're not going to give you money. But we were interested in, okay, why are you not going to give us money? And the two things that came up over and over again is topic is too niche, and especially Americans always said I'm not sure how to market that as Americans. So we were all right, so what do you do about that? And we reacted to this. And the simple thing we did is, we put more Vietnam into it, because we thought Americans know what Vietnam is. And it was always a thing, of course, because it's the 60s, and it is baked into the German protest culture that they also protest Vietnam, or the Vietnam War specifically. But we did it by putting the whole Ho Chi Minh thing in it. The North Vietnam flag appeared more. So, and actually it kind of worked, because when we said hey, but you can do this, it's also about the Vietnam War. And they're oh yeah, Vietnam War, I heard about that. But it still kind of only worked a little bit. So the next thing we tried is okay, let's try to kind of change our narrative a little bit, because till this point it was very linear thing. Tina comes to town, explores different factions, and then learns something about it. It felt still a little bit educational. So we said hey, let's change that. Now is the time loop. It worked. We just thought okay, time loops were a big thing, or it's still a big thing right now, but back then it kind of ties into a lot of genres. So we just changed it and started to pitch that. People responded to it, and we started to kind of rebuild our whole idea about it. Instead of having a long story, now it's the same day over and over again. You come to town, your friend dies because a policeman beats him to death. The day repeats, save him. And then the idea is to explore kind of history, so this experimental feature. But this is kind of how publishers, at least, it's not everything, but in a short version, kind of influenced us in changing the game somehow. What does it all mean? So is this somehow helpful maybe? That was my thing. How can I wrap this up somehow? So to sum up or give an outlook, there's three things that kind of we found ourselves in that I think is kind of interesting, because it kind of aligns with some other friends of mine that also developed historical or political games. So the first one is obviously you have that poll that you have your own interest. In our case, we were interested in the radicalization of student movement of the 1960s. For me, it's a personal thing. You know, I grew up in Germany, or like the first things I remember in Germany in the 90s, the RAF was still around, and I remember the posters of like wanted things, and I knew it from like, I don't know, American comics, wanted, but here's this in a German supermarket on a Netto door, and I'm like, who are these people? They're terrorists. So like I'm interested in this. And then the next one is obviously that you have, or like, as I described, we've kind of had this perceived need, and we need to clarify to our funding bodies that we're not perceived as radical ourselves, because there's always this, if you're interested in left-wing radicalism, then people think, are you also one of them? And so we kind of felt that we need to explain ourselves there. So that's the second poll. And then the last one is the market. So like the publishers kind of like wanting to we needed to publish this money, so they tried to sell it to a market, and then they gave us some pointers to where they think they could sell, and we tried to a degree, keep our vision, but kind of lean into it to make it sellable. So what can we, like, in this triangle, so what can we learn from this? So there's two obvious learnings that I just want to mention, so you don't think I didn't think about it. So obviously, we're kind of like naive starting this, right? We have like this idea, and like it's about politics, it's about some brutal stuff, and we think that that's not going to be a problem, we just talk about it. But this is just something that you learn, like something about the societal forces that you put your topic in then, right? And then the other one obviously is that, and I learned it over and over with each project, projects change from beginning to end, sometimes radically. That's just a thing that happens in a lot of projects, but game development specifically. But most importantly, and I think that's something that it's kind of hard for me to also admit sometimes, or like for everybody, that we learned that developing anything that has a pronounced political message, whatever that may be, even if it's just like kind of interrogative, so like you're trying to like find something out about it, so you're not making, let's say, propaganda, will always set you on a path on an ideological clash with somebody, because there's somebody that is like either intentionally or unintentionally misunderstanding you, will kind of like oppose you. And this clash, it doesn't matter how much you try to not it be, it will always be emotional, because it kind of like it's rooted in the fundamental person, or like in the fundamental being of what we are. And this is especially emotional because also it just reveals the power structures in which you develop, in which you work, in which you talk, right? And so the direct thing that we learned, as an unknown studio, we lack the power, or if I say it differently, we lack the social and economical capital to just like push our message. So the resistance that we felt kind of pushed us to the side, because when we tried to insist on it, we realized we're slipping away. So like, because we tried to make a commercial game at that point, we kind of like tried to work around this. We kind of like really feel this power, right? And so, wait, I actually made a graphic for this, so it looks like this. Sorry, completely forgot about it. So like own interest, social and economical capital, right? And then these revelations are kind of like, I don't think they're neither bad or good. It kind of feels a little complainy, but that's not how it's meant to be. It's kind of like fascinating what you learn about how society works, right? It's something that we all kind of knew, but it's a different thing when you kind of feel it, and it really on your own body, because you react to this. It's kind of weird. But to kind of come to an end, and to put it to an uplifting thing, that this was really hard in the end, because I kind of came to the point and felt like this is depressing, so how do I make it better? So, well, we did not make, so far at least, weren't able to make Berlin Maniacs into a successful commercial game. This public funding schemes, which kind of taught us a lot about how the German state kind of implicitly thinks about things, even if the funding body is somewhat autonomous, but still funded by the state. It enabled us to build a prototype and to talk about this. And through that, we connected to other people that had sometimes similar observations, similar things, and you kind of like get to talk about the topic. And that's actually very valuable. And in that, we also realized that there is like this, and especially academia is an interesting field because it's way more free. You can talk about stuff that you could never say like in the public things. Like, I mean, the easiest thing is like, you can be a Marxist in academia, or God, don't be a Marxist in politics, at least not in Germany. I mean, if you want to be on the fringes and then never teach in academia, then yeah, you can do that. So talking about Germany's weirdnesses, that's actually not a joke, that happens. So, but there is definitely this intersection, especially between academia and game development, that we saw through this, which creates a lot of potentials in this intersection to playfully explore history, politics, how it intersects. Even if our game is not even complete, it's not even close to the feature that having the features that it should have. But we still already talk about it, and that it was somewhat, I would say, even a success. And now, obviously, we're still trying to make it somehow. But it shifted away from the commercial focus to more like, hey, how can we build this by maybe like, for example, we started as a classic limited company. We now want to, as Kasi also mentioned, switch it to a co-op, so everybody owns everything, that people have more stake in it, and it can be, and I meant it in a positive sense, it can be more of an amateur in the sense of like a lover's project, right? Amateur says like somebody that loves something really. And I think that progress is, in the context of things, actually a good one. And with that, I would be done.